back to what's going on with impeachment. Polls seem to be moving against the Democrats. It looks like independents are really pulling the polls, too. Let's talk about all of this with Hans von Spakovsky, Heritage Foundation Senior Legal Fellow. Great to see you, Hans.
Thanks for having me.
One of the polls say what President Trump did was wrong, but it's not an impeachable offense. There's no smoking gun, email, or document. Hearsay from 9 witnesses. They don't see bribery. Democrat overreach is calling it bribery. Is that a problem for them?
Yeah, I think it is a problem, and I think the polling shows that. The public, I think, saw, what did we see in the last 2 weeks? We saw witnesses brought forward, all of whom were speculating on what happened, or producing hearsay on what happened, or providing their opinions saying, well, they didn't like the way the president was conducting foreign policy with Ukraine. None of that is serious misconduct that warrants impeachment, and I think the American public clearly recognizes that.
Okay, we also have breaking news. A federal court now saying former White House counsel Don McGahn must appear before the impeachment inquiry, denying the White House claim of absolute immunity. Your take on that?
Well, that may be a lower court that's going to get appealed up the line eventually to the Supreme Court. And what the president can assert is executive privilege, that he can use that to prevent his closest officials from testifying. We'll see what the Supreme Court eventually says about that.
The president says he does want a Senate trial. He wants to call the whistleblower, Hunter and Joe Biden, Adam Schiff. Remember, the Clintons, there's precedent here. The Clintons' lawyers grilled independent prosecutor Ken Starr during President Bill Clinton's Senate trial. And there are questions for Representative Schiff about his denying not knowing the name of the whistleblower who talked to Schiff's staff before he filed the complaint. I want to move on. Democrats keep saying Watergate. Watergate had firsthand witnesses in the Oval Office. H.R. Haldeman, John Mitchell, John Dean. Democrats don't have any of that. Most of them never talked to the president. None of the witnesses saw bribery. No Republican witnesses called. This is possibly why Washington Post congressional reporter Rachel Bates says moderate Democrats are now getting cold feet on impeachment. Watch this. Okay, so we don't have the soundbite. So your reaction to all of that?
Well, look, with the Watergate, we had actual crimes being committed, a break-in and a burglary. Here, there's been no federal law violated by the president, and the idea that bribery occurred is just an absurd notion. Any federal prosecutor looking at this who's being objective is going to tell you that none of the elements are present to make this bribery under federal law. In fact, we put conditions on foreign aid that we give to other countries all the time. And all of this really is about something that never happened.
Yeah.
Ukraine got its aid. They didn't start a corruption investigation, so nothing really happened.
You know, as we reported, legal analyst Jonathan Turley again warning you can't impeach a president after the shortest impeachment investigation in history and claim obstruction if the White House has asked the courts to decide on executive privilege. Let's watch Jonathan Turley here.
Democrats have to decide if they want a real or recreational impeachment. The shortest period of investigation in history for an impeachment, and then impeach a president for failing to turn over documents in that period because he went to the courts. If that is obstruction for a president to seek judicial review in a conflict with Congress, then you could have impeached every living president, particularly Barack Obama, who made the same type of extreme interpretations when he refused documents of witnesses in Fast and Furious. So, you know, at some point, adult supervision has to kick in here. And we have to decide, are we really trying to remove this president? And if so, the case has to be made.
And the Democrats, let's remind the viewer, they've been on the impeachment bandwagon long before the whistleblower stepped forward. They were asking for the president's impeachment before he was even elected. Let's watch this.
Either of you ever have any evidence of quid pro quo? Mr. Morrison?
No, ma'am.
Ambassador Volker?
I did not.
Any evidence of bribery?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am. Not that I can recall.
No, they did not.
He said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo.
You testified that you had no direct knowledge of any nefarious motivations to withhold aid to Ukraine, correct?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, you testified that there were no strings attached to the aid, correct? That's page 184 of your deposition.
Yeah, no such knowledge.
In fact, you testified that what you knew was that President Trump was, one, skeptical of foreign assistance generally. Mr. Ratcliffe highlighted that in his round of questioning. And two, skeptical of the corruption environment in Ukraine. Is that accurate?
Okay, we queued up the wrong soundbite montage. Forgive us, but this is that the montage was no bribery.
No, in fact, look, that clip is great because it points out the fact that Democrats simply were unable to produce any evidence of any of the claims that they have been making. And that's why there's nothing to impeach here. Look, what's really going on is a political ploy by Democrats to go after the president, and they're disagreeing with the way he handled his foreign policy. Well, you know, the president's the chief diplomat of the United States, not members of Congress, not Adam Schiff, and that is not an impeachable offense.
Really interesting development, too. NBC's Chuck Todd seemed to agree with Mississippi Republican Senator Roger Wicker that Ukrainians did meddle in the 2016 election, despite what Fiona Hill is testifying. Now, again, this isn't about the DNC server and CrowdStrike and all that. It's about actually Ukrainians meddling. Watch this.
She's correct that Russia tried to interfere in 2016. Also, Ukrainians themselves tried to interfere also. But Chuck,
isn't there a big difference between the two and Ukrainians? Look, I understand there's individual Ukrainians who were upset that candidate Donald Trump wanted Crimea to stay with Russia. Is that the same as the Russian government and Putin ordering a full-fledged interference in the United States election?
I'm concerned about both.
Well, two Ukrainian courts did rule that, yes, Ukrainians, including a member of the legislature there, tried to meddle in the 2016 election.
Well, it's certainly something that we ought to be looking into. But remember, Democrats have totally cut off any investigation into that. They particularly refuse witnesses the Republicans wanted to bring forward, for example, to look into what Hunter Biden was actually doing there. What did Joe Biden do to help potentially cover up what his son was doing there? They don't want that looked into. And that is another clue to the American people that there is not an objective investigation going on here.
Okay, Hans, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing.
We had